Catalina is likely home in southern Mexico or beyond into Central America, wherever her home really is. But for that brief moment, Victor and Catalina weren't migrants, and they weren't criminals. No families depended upon them. They were just people, sitting in creaky metal folding chairs with two Americans, laughing, flirting, and being distinctly and tangibly human.
Open quote. Operation Streamline is unlike anything else in the American criminal justice system. End quote. Laura Conifer, Federal Public Defender, District of Arizona.
Enter the Special Proceedings Room of Arizona District Court. Originally built to house naturalization hearings, now home to the government's latest experiment in mass deportation. Chains clank around the arms, legs, waists of 70 brown bodies. Their 8 collective attorneys sanitize their white hands in between symbolic paper shufflings and adjustments of their loud, graphic ties. Today, one of these ties features Groucho Marx. The room is long, the visitors' pews mostly empty. 5 microphones stand at attention in front of the raised judge's bench. As if by conveyor belt, the latest beneficiaries of American justice respond to the same 5 questions with the same 3 answers. Sí, no, culpable.
Sí, no, culpable.
Sí, no, culpable.
Sí, no, culpable. Sí, no, culpable.
Sí, no, culpable.
No, culpable.
Sí, no, culpable. Sí, no, culpable. Sí, no, culpable.
The interpreter translates. Yes, no, guilty. Close your eyes, and the clanking chains, shuffling feet, and faint smell of unwashed bodies lends itself to familiar images. A cattle barn, a slave auction. But no, this is Operation Streamline, the epitome of Border Patrol's latest strategy, the consequence delivery system. Deterrence in the form of a felony charge, keeping immigrants off our streets and in our jails. Brute efficiency, with just enough due process to keep Mr. Marx Brothers' ties sleeping soundly at night, and enough semblance of security enforcement to overlook the inconvenient push-pull factors that have gathered us here today in the Special Proceedings Room of Arizona District Court. Now jump to Grupos Beta, a migrant shelter where the deterred masses are sent upon formal deportation. Here, the thought of an impending felony charge is barely a blip on the radar. Instead, a Oaxacan woman weighs the danger of the desert with the depth of her debt back home, the family she must support, and the minimum wage that barely covers food. So let's talk about deterrence for a second. As an ideal, deterrence conditions behavior by making unfavorable decisions result in unfavorable outcomes. For example, the risk of crossing the border is increased by putting a felony charge on the table. What Operation Streamline seems to ignore are the risks facing migrants on the other side of the border. If the Fed wants to implement effective deterrence, they will have to out-deter poverty, gang violence, and unemployment, and outweigh the desire to earn a living wage and reunite separated families. Operation Streamline is founded on an understanding of immigration that doesn't jive with the reality of the border. It creates an illusion of successful deterrence that actively obscures the root causes of migration. It's not streamlined, it's sloppy. Now jump to Washington, D.C., the epicenter of this fundamental disconnect between policy and reality. Here, immigration reform manifests itself as a pathway to citizenship modeled after a minefield, riddled with qualifiers and exceptions that eliminate nearly half of the 11 million would-be Americans. This comes hand in hand with provisions to triple the deterring power of Border Patrol. Instead of the current 70-person cap on Operation Streamline trials, imagine the efficiency of 210 brown bodies with chains clanking, feet shuffling, sí, no, culpable. Now back to the courtroom, where the brown bodies breathe a sigh of relief as their felony charge is waived just as quickly as it was invented. See, says Groucho Marx, you got off easy. Just a little time served and we'll send you back home safe and sound. But the story doesn't end there. Now enter the true beneficiaries of American justice, the Corrections Corporation of America. The private prison industry graciously opens its doors to 70 new payments of $120 a day. And after 30, 60, 180 days, these same brown bodies are sent back to their families and their debt and another long desert crossing. The system isn't broken, it's functioning at highest capacity. The system doesn't need fixing, it needs breaking.
Quote, "The prison industrial complex is an enterprise whereby lawbreakers and undocumented immigrants are commodified as raw materials for private profit." Immigrants have overtaken drug offenders as the largest segment of prisoners in federal prisons and jails.
I met Rogelio this summer during my travels through the U.S.-Mexico border. Under the blazing sun, I noticed that there, underneath the tent, sat a young, 16-year-old boy, blankly staring out into the open desert. He had just arrived to the No More Deaths camp not too long ago. He was waiting for his feet to heal from the brutal blisters he acquired during his expedition through the desert. He was timid at first, but his smile was extremely contagious. After dinner, we showed him how to play the game of spoons. My eyes quivered with enthusiasm. I sat there and watched as my friend Ashley shuffled the deck. She gave each of us 4 cards, and in a split second, the game began. I frantically picked a card one by one, and continued to pass the cards clockwise. My palms sweating bullets each time I picked up a different one. When someone had 4 at the same time, that's when the real game began. Each of us competed against one another in order to grab a spoon. We were all fighting one another for the scarce resource. I felt my heart bulging through my chest, my adrenaline rushing as the cards were in motion. I had to move fast and with great agility if I wanted to win the game. When all of a sudden, boom, Fabiola snatched the spoon. That's when all hell broke loose. And in 1, 2, 3, whew, I managed to acquire a spoon. Everyone grabbed one, except for Rogelio. Rogelio was born in Mexico City. He and his family came to the United States for a better future, just like any other migrant family. He lived in Los Angeles, California for a great part of his life. He went to school here and worked in an auto body shop for some time before he got deported. Now he was back in the States, hoping to return to the place he once called home. We played the game again, and for a second time, Rogelio did not get the spoon. Later, I found out that Rogelio turned himself in to Border Patrol. Did he realize that his heart did not belong in the U.S., or did he realize that he just could not play spoon with the dream? We played a third time, and yet again, Rogelio didn't get the spoon. Rogelio couldn't get the spoon, but not because he did not want to. His hands were cleaning the blisters from his feet, so I got the spoon. His hands were cleaning the sweat that ran across his forehead as he roofed a mansion in Orange County, so I got the spoon. His hands were busy picking strawberries in Watsonville, so I got the spoon. His hands were busy cleaning the bathrooms at Whitman College, so I got the spoon. It wasn't Rogelio's fault that he wasn't able to gather a spoon. It was a simple fact that because I got the spoon, he didn't. It's just all one big crazy game. Keep the spoon away from the migrant. The game of spoons, much like the American dream, is a farce, a harshly crafted scheme that, no matter the consequences, never seems to be in favor of migrants. People worry about migrants taking jobs, benefits, spoons, from people that really need them. But as the political theorist Joseph Cairns contends, one of the ways in which those in power maintain privileges is by getting people to focus on potential trade-offs between those who are badly off and those who are worse off, thereby treating their own privileges as a background given that cannot be challenged. Thank you.
It's not only the private entrepreneurs or firms that make a profit, although they are important, but it's also the ways in which an entire path has been created around how to deal with certain problems. An entire development path has been created through the assumption that there is a perpetual enemy who must always be fought, but who can never be conquered. And that's where international militarization and domestic militarization meet, at this notion that there's the production of an enemy around which we organize everything, not simply profit.
The United States lies a mere 600 meters north, true border territory. And over a watery cream of broccoli soup, I discussed large-scale immigration reform with a woman named Maria. We sit at a table in a migrant shelter where Maria has been staying for the past couple nights. This food is not going to fill me up, is my initial thought, until Maria's ideas on the U.S.-Mexico border spew like a newly uncaged garden hose, flooding my mind with wholly novel concepts. Much like our elected representatives, The other students on my trip and myself had been struggling for any sort of answers to the immigration mess we'd observed. I began to wonder why I wasn't representative of Maria debating these ideas in Congress. My hands seemed to instinctively shoot to my pockets periodically during this conversation, clutching the small blue book with the words United States of America blazoned across the cover. Maria has been explaining to me that she is here to attempt to cross the border into the United States, but her words catch me off guard. I want to go home, she begins, as I try to keep my eyebrows from arching in surprise. But I must cross. I try to put on an understanding face as I struggle to understand this contradiction. Meanwhile, my hands fumble for the blue book but fail to find it in my pocket. Did it fall out? Did I leave it in the van? I try to remain engaged while my hands nervously search for that blue book. I ask Maria what I should do, how I can help. If you come back to Mexico, she says, her unwavering eye contact bringing my mind back to the conversation, please bring your factories with you. Then I can stay here. My hands finally feel the outline of the blue book and my heart rate slows. Her words begin to make sense as they fight past the expectations I had of impoverished migrants. She doesn't want to be in the United States. She wants to be home. A plastic tarp in downtown Nogales, Mexico, provided us with a much-needed respite from the hot sun. We wrapped up a conversation with fired maquiladora workers, my blue book still firmly in hand. Maquiladoras, factories that simply assemble parts for a parent company in the United States, were a direct product of NAFTA. A few months ago, these workers had shown up to the maquiladora only to see that their workplace was entirely shut down and locked. I looked at the dark maquiladora and saw the workers' nervousness and uncertainty. But now, without any reliable means of income, my mind flashed to the bathroom stall at Sycamore Valley Elementary School. With my pants around my knees, the school bully swung open the door and flicked off the bathroom lights, laughing obnoxiously as I was left in the pitch-black stall. My blue book now represented something else. It seemed to be the bully, the one taking advantage of Mexico to further its own economic power. I expected the workers to see this too, to fault the U.S. for instigating NAFTA and creating the maquiladora system that has caused many to look north for better opportunities. But after thanking the workers for their time, the spokesman replied in a remarkable way. Instead of laying blame, he explained that all North Americans would be welcomed by Mexicans with open arms. For we are sister countries, he added with a smile. Once again, my expectations were entirely off the mark. I couldn't help but wonder just what else my blue book and I were wrong about.
The economic cost to migrants of crossing the border has doubled to an average of $2,500. Migrants often take out loans of 12 to 15% interest per month to pay this cost. Sometimes the loans actually come from U.S. labor contractors. In no uncertain terms, the Border Patrol's goal of increasing the expense and deadliness of the crossing has succeeded. Has this prevented or slowed flows of migration? Studies disagree. Some say that massive increases in enforcement have had a small impact on migration flows compared to other factors like the U.S. recession. Others say there has been no impact at all.
General Napolitano, former Secretary of Homeland Security, once said, "Show me a 50-foot wall, and I'll show you a 51-foot ladder."
After days of hearing the stories of migrants, shaped by the mouths of border activists and volunteers, I had begun to approach visits to migrant shelters with the twisted intention of finding the most tragic story, one that would emotionally shake audiences at home like you into action. So as Maria bent to the courtyard floor of the migrant shelter in Agua Prieta to demonstrate how truly backbreaking it is to pick strawberries, tobacco, and green tomatoes in South Carolina fields, I began asking her pointed questions about her challenges crossing the border with her son and son-in-law. During pauses in translation, I wondered if the son-in-law's Timberland boots would make it across the desert, and why was he being so quiet? His eyes met mine for a moment, and then he spoke. Once the translation had crossed through several minds and bodies to my own, I froze. How could I respond to a question about how do you feel about migrants? It was more than a question. It was a statement that uncovered my privilege in being the interviewer, a U.S. citizen who had paid for a pricey plane ticket to the Southwest and held the right passport. I didn't have to worry about being separated from my mother, my father, or my little sister for months, if not years. I didn't have to worry about finding a job without the proper documents. I didn't have to worry about dying alone in an empty desert canyon. Flustered, I stammered something silly along the lines of, well, we're here to listen to your stories because we want to understand, and I believe we share a lot of the same values. Spanish wasn't thick enough to mask my incoherent thoughts because he responded with, you know, Americans don't want to do the work we do. It's not popular, it's hard. Not only was he completely right, but his questions revealed my piece in the Porter puzzle. My uncomfortable stammering, the hot blush coloring my cheeks, and my gaze shifting downward were all symptoms of the realization of how much power I had in asking questions. It made me think less about his boots and their durability, and more about where my own shoes were allowed to walk and what I was allowed to do in those steps.
The first person we met on our trip was a pastor at a local church named John Fife. In the 1980s, John was part of the sanctuary movement that harbored Central America's churches. They crossed into the country illegally, running away from violence in their home country. We asked John how, knowingly risking significant jail time, he continued with the movement. He looked us in the eye and said, we had no choice but to act.
If you were given a slip of paper before coming into this auditorium, can you please take a moment to refresh your mind on your given scenario? Please look up once you are done. You were all given scenarios of people who have migrated to the U.S. in many different forms and for a number of different reasons. It is estimated that in the United States there are about 11 million undocumented people. This next activity is a simulation to give you all an idea of what the most recent proposed Senate immigration bill means for the path to citizenship. In a moment, I will ask everyone to stand. I will read off different scenarios and indicate whether you, as your character, should remain standing or if you should be seated. Please remain silent throughout this activity. Does anyone have any questions? At this moment, can I please have everyone stand? And only if you received the slip.